In this day and age, you need to know that you're going to like a board game before you buy it. So if you've been interested in Witchbound, I thought I would just share some thoughts on it as somebody who just finished it last weekend. Apologies about the cat. So it took my partner and I about 11 hours over 3 days, but we finished the main quest and we also finished most of the side quests of Witchbound. So we actually backed the game when it was crowdfunding, so that we got ours a few weeks ago. It takes a lot longer because we live in Australia and we're far away from everything. The reason that we backed the Kickstarter campaign is mostly because it has cats and it's just really cute and wholesome. And we wanted a game that was sort of more story-driven, but like isn't dramatic and scary and sad. You know, something that's sort of lighthearted and fun to play, which I will say this is definitely lighthearted and fun to play. So all good on that front. So what are the basics of this game? The game is about Rennie, who is a teenage girl who goes to stay with her gran, who owns a bakery that specializes in muffins, on an island that is known for witches and cats. However, there haven't been any witches for over 100 years. Now that actually, the island itself, people can go to the town, that's totally fine. However, only witches can go beyond the walls of the towns. I'm not 100% sure if it's canon, but I'm pretty sure that means that nobody has been out of the city for over 100 years. And there is also a guy guarding it, so it's not like you can just like scale the wall and get over, you're stuck in there. Now, while people are stuck in the city, the witches are stuck on the island. In theory, they can't leave the island. So that brings up an issue when Rennie discovers that she is a witch and her powers are awakened. She will now be confined to the island for the rest of her life, and that causes her to spiral a lot. In Rennie's quest to stop being a witch, she needs to learn about witchcraft and the truth about witches on the island as well. And so in order to do that, she needs to gather information, and that is the idea behind the main quest, at least at first. There is other elements of the main quest that come in later, but I won't talk about those right this second. During the story, there is another character who is named Cessa, and Cessa lives on the island in kind of a bad situation, but I won't spoil it. Cessa is obsessed with witches and desperately wants to be a witch. So her and Rennie team up to learn everything they can about witches, and Cessa becomes her sort of the expert that she can confide in. Now, this next sentence that I'm going to say is a spoiler, so cover your ears if you don't want it spoiled, but there is also an element to the main plot about stopping somebody who is doing something evil and bad on the island, but you don't find out about that until actually reasonably far through the quest, although it's definitely implied that there are dragons from the very beginning, although this creature is not a dragon. I will not spoil it any further. So how does the game actually work? If you haven't played a story-driven game like this, then I'll just quickly explain. So we've got this book here. This book has all of the maps for each location that you can go to on the island. So when you're walking around, you'll move from scene to scene. They tell you which roads lead to which roads, so you can sort of navigate around the island. Like, I think it's similar to how you would play it in a video game, but they've managed to translate it into a book pretty well. But yeah, you can see that there are plenty of NPCs here, and they all have numbers next to them. So what that means is that you can combine that number with a prompt. So you collect prompts across the game. So for example, the news prompt is 22. So you can see here that this is 22 and this is 10. So if I go to 2210, then it will give you the scene. Now, when you're moving around in the book, you will collect keywords from various conversations and activities. And when you have those keywords, you can unlock the next conversation or scene in a particular sideline. So here you can see that if we get the word satchel, we can go to another entry and we can read it. So that's how we progress throughout the game. The main quest is in here, but also all of the side quests are in here. Now, in terms of side quests, there are quite a lot. There is also the main quest, which is relatively long and detailed. I think the side quest probably took us more time than the main quest. Just because of the number of them that there are. Something else that is really crucial to this game is the use of symbols. So you can see here that there are cleverly hidden symbols around the various scenes, and those symbols correspond with numbers. See here, these symbols will give you a number, and then that number obviously refers to the entry in this book. So you collect these throughout the game, and one of my tips for playing the game would definitely be to start drawing these symbols on a piece of paper since the very beginning, because we spent a lot of time going back over places we'd already been because we didn't do that. When you enter scenes, you're often going to be met with encounters. So the encounters can be anything. So we've got bats, frogs, etc. I won't spoil them, but this fellow, he comes up quite a lot. So what did I like and dislike about Witchbound? The first thing that I'll start with is the writing and the characters. So the writing in the scene book is really strong. I would say it's good. It's not overly long, which can often be an issue with this game. You know, we have Arthurian Knights, and some of those entries, they go on for a lot longer than they do in here. They're kept relatively brief, which I think works well. And the characters all have like sort of different, mostly distinct voices from each other. So I think that's a good attention to detail too. The characters are definitely one of the better parts of the game. So the NPCs, they're pretty well developed. So they each have a history. They have various quests. They have rivalries with each other. They have pieces of information to share. You know, some of the quests are funny. Some of them are more like emotional, helping them out with stuff that they genuinely need. There's one that is quite, I'm going to say soppy, but like it's a romantic plotline, and it's sort of, when you finish it, it's quite a satisfying plotline to finish. So many of the NPCs are descended from witches, and they will give you various information about witchcraft, although none of them have been alive long enough to have been around when there were still witches on the island. But yeah, I would say that the variety of characters and the quality of the character development and the character arcs are definitely a strong pro for this game. The next thing that I thought was a really strong part of the game is the use of symbols. I've sort of already shown you a little bit already what they look like, but there are a lot of different symbols that correspond with various types of encounters. So there's climb encounters, dive encounters, forage encounters. I think they're hidden to a good degree where you can see them a little bit easier with a torch. They're a little bit hard to spot otherwise, but they're not so easy that it feels like it's meant for children. The side quests are another thing that I thought was really, really strong. There are a lot of side quests. One thing that the one thing that like I would change if I was making this game was that I kind of expected that this was the number of side quests there would be. There would be one per row. But no, we found more than that. And I think there were others that we didn't get to. The side quests have you doing all sorts of things, but they're very cleverly written in order to flesh out the world a bit more. And so I thought that was a nice touch. The final thing that I would say I really liked, and this one is definitely the most petty and kind of ridiculous, is the fact that they didn't rely on a romance subplot with the main character. I'm not going to condemn stories that have a romance in them. Sometimes they're thematic and they work really well and they make sense. But sometimes I feel like they get stuffed into story-driven games just to, like, I don't know, improve people's satisfaction when they play it, and then their two great loves finally get together, you know, and it's just like that's not related to the primary player experience. So I feel like sometimes it just can be a weak element of some games. Something that I also really like is that the main relationships that the main character develops were mostly friendships, and especially with Sessa, they have a friendship that is very well written and thought out. It's not superficially like, oh, these two both know things about witches. You know, there is actual genuine compatibility between them, and I think that's a nice touch. Now to the things that I didn't love, and overall I want to say that I really did love this game. I thoroughly enjoyed playing it. I might replay it. I definitely am recommending it to other people, but there were some things that personally I didn't like. So the first one of those things was encounters every time you enter a scene. So there are some encounters that are fairly benign, and there are some that are more significant and can cause you to get injured enough to where you have to leave and abandon the quest that you're on currently and go and seek more coins so you can buy more potions to heal yourself. And so something that I don't particularly love is that these encounters happen whenever you entered spaces. So sometimes you would be going through a scene to get to another scene and you would have an encounter. And the encounter just, in the end, it was slowing you down. Like the first time we entered each scene, it was fun to do them, and it was fun for a little while after that. But after a while, you're moving around the world so much that you end up coming across encounters constantly, and it just becomes a little bit repetitive. Something that I always think about when it comes to games is like how much time your players spend on doing the primary activity of the game. And I think Isle of Cats is like my best example of how I think this doesn't work. In that game, you spend a lot of time trading cards and doing administrative tasks, and you spend very little time on the actual puzzle of putting cats onto your boat, which is sort of the main selling point, right? It's a puzzle game. And so you can see how that applies here, although not to the same degree. And I still like Witchbound. I wouldn't say that I like Isle of Cats particularly. But yeah, because you're doing so many encounters, you're spending less time on the puzzle, which the puzzle was the primary reason that we wanted to play the game. However, I can acknowledge that this is a personal preference. Some people really like games where the stakes are quite high and it seems like your character could die or become injured at any moment, and you have to be thrifty about what's in your inventory, how much money you have, whether or not you can afford things. So I think that also comes down to player preference, and I like the puzzle. I want to be doing the puzzle. That's my personality. So in this game, you do have a few things that you're worrying about. So you've got your health, your magic, and your luck, and your familiar. I should have mentioned the familiar earlier. You get a familiar who comes into the stories a little bit, and they have their own ability, which is to shapeshift. Actually, that's a spoiler. Forget you heard that. The number 2 thing that I found a little bit tricky, and I think maybe I'm not totally understanding how this was meant to be implemented, but it's the broomways. So the broomways are basically shortcuts you can ride on your broom from various scenes, so you don't have to go through other scenes and encounters. And we did use these quite a bit, but we sort of got to a place at the end of the game where we were really sick of flicking through the book to go and walk through each scene. So, I mean, the broomways make it better, but I feel like you can also just not do that. You can just not walk through the scenes. You can just flick to the page in the book that you want to go to, and because I guess we were playing it for the puzzle and to solve the story, we sort of ended up doing that. We didn't really end up using the broomways. Now, I think that the idea itself is really cool. I think this one also might be more of a player preference. Final thing about the game that we found tricky, and probably the thing that made it quite difficult in the second half for us, is the amount of testing that you have to do in order to figure things out. So you can see here that we've got the prompts. We've got our characters. So we have, for example, Garrett, who's number 10. You end up, you know that you need to find keywords and things, and so you know that you need to end up talking to all of the people in the town, but you have to look up the numbers. So, for example, we were going through and we were looking up, we were using the news prompt on every townsperson one after the other in order to try and figure out where the information was. And so it got to a point where with some of the quests and some of the puzzles, you were put in a situation where you didn't know what to do. Like the clue itself wasn't super clear about what you were meant to be doing. So you would just sit there and you would just try stuff. Like, for example, one of them is a painting with a mermaid in it, and you have to figure out how to interact with the painting. You end up sitting there going through all of the prompts one after the other. Now, the prompt that it ended up being is not something that was super intuitive. It's not something that we guessed. It was something that we only got because we tried. There's another instance in here where you can give Gran's muffins to people as well. That's a really cute touch. Honestly, the muffins is pretty cute. With this particular example, it is a plant. You're interacting with the plant, and we tried everything, all of the prompts that we had on the plant, and the one that worked was the muffin one, which was sort of it didn't make a ton of sense when we played, because we would never have guessed that if we were not just testing. And our testing felt a little bit like something you were not meant to be doing. So if you decide to play Witchbound, I do have some tips for you that I think will make your player experience better and might reduce the amount of time that you spend frustrated and trying to crack things, and more time spent sort of in the more satisfying elements of the mystery. Despite all of the things that I questioned or didn't necessarily love, I do still think this is a really good game. I'm not trying to criticize it. So the first thing that I would do is, for each NPC that you interact with, I would write down their number, and then I would write down the number of the prompt that you've already tried on them. And if the prompt shows you a keyword, writing down what the keyword is. A mistake that we made is that we ended up having to go throughout the town multiple times, testing people one after the other to try and find a particular keyword, when what we should have done was just write down that this person had this keyword. In a similar vein, I would get a piece of paper and write down the scene and then just list the symbols, because you'll discover the symbols, but you won't collect the card that gives you the corresponding number in the scene book until later in the story. So instead of having to flick through and go through each one, just write them down so that you can see which ones you haven't discovered yet. The same thing sort of applies to the prompts. So I would write down for each character, if you've done 23, 24, 25. That way you're not guessing, because after a while, it took us 11 hours to get through the game. And in that point, when we were sort of at hour 10, we've forgotten about who we talked to in hour 1 and what keywords we got back then, because we didn't at the start of the game, we should have had more foresight, but we were not writing them down. We just didn't realize, I think, that you would need to do that, in that sometimes the clues are not obvious. Sometimes the clues are not obvious enough that you would make a leap between two. Sometimes you have to sort of have it written down so you actually do remember. Overall, this game is really lighthearted. It's really fun. It's really cute. The art is really nice. I would definitely recommend this game. If you have played Witchbound, I am very curious to see if you worked out scene. It's the corresponding entry for 1111, 4 ones in a row. We had a lot of trouble with that, and I actually don't fully understand now why that number was the answer. We're a group of indie TTRPG designers from Australia, and if you're interested in board games or TTRPGs, please give us a follow. We do release games. We have 2 big games at the moment and lots of little ones, including on our website you can download 7 of our games for free and try them out. Our 2 bigger games, they are GM-less, so you can play them solo or you can play them multiplayer. They're called Cartograph and Caught in the Rain. And we do have more games in the works, so follow us if you like games. And thank you for your support.